Hello and welcome to the Draco Podcast. I'm Micah Metz, the writer and creator of Burdens of Draco, and with me is Carissa Buchanan, the biggest, baddest artist this side of the Mississippi.
I don't even know which side of the Mississippi I'm on.
Me either. I just thought that sounded funny. If you could go back and start the Burdens of Draco project over, what would you change?
It's kind of a dumb question because because we spent so much time like trying to refine our process, and we still are. I think that's the biggest part, is like if I could go back, I would take everything that I know now and implement it, because
Yeah.
I mean, during the first chapter, we wasted so much time and effort doing things that didn't matter or weren't being used, and we just didn't know better at that point.
Mhm.
Because we were flying by the seat of our pants, and we still are, but that's fine. um, so it was mostly stuff like that, thinking about, how far we've come in like communicating, so that like we're more open about the script before we start. I mean, even before we start boarding, while we're boarding,
Mhm.
like to talk about it, and try and cut out the stuff that's going to like ultimately be unnecessary before we do like put too much work into it. um but at the same time, it's been fun and insightful learning how to do that. So I don't think it's been worthless to struggle that way. I think it's been good
Yeah.
for us, but I mean, still, it would have been nice to save some time.
Yeah, I will say, looking back, out of all the things that have happened over the past 8 years, there are several things that I could go back and change, but then I wouldn't have learned from those things, or appreciated how good something might be, purely because, and I'm kind of referring to, I guess my answer would be, I wouldn't have tried other artists. I would have found you first, or waited until I found you and just kept working at it. But I learned too much from the other artists doing something I didn't like, or the communication wasn't quite right, or they weren't on the same page, or whatever it might be. And that taught me a lot about different things that I needed to be aware of and
Yeah.
focus on. So, yeah, it's kind of a cop out answer, but the question overall is like, can't really go back and change it, but we can make it a lot better as we go forward. So,
Yeah,
and that's what we're
exactly.
trying to do. How long does a page take to draw?
Which is again kind of a dumb question.
Because they all take a different amount of time. I know the answer, but other people might not.
Yeah, so I I think for this one, I have to go back to like what my professors always taught me in college, which was like you you raise your children at the same time. That's something that like an art department says a lot for, it sounds weird, but like, if you've got two kids, like you
Mhm.
can't just raise one all the way to 18 and then like get to start on the second one. Like
No.
no, you have them, and you got to raise them all at once. So that's part of the reason why I have absolutely no idea how long it takes me to do a page, because like, I go through and I storyboard all of the pages first. And then I'll go through and like I'll ink them all, and then I'll color them all, and then I'll shade them all. Like
Mhm.
I just do each step all at once, all across the board. Um so like even in an individual step, I'm not really sure. Like it depends on the technical difficulty of the page that I'm working on.
Yeah.
But generally, like, storyboarding is the fastest. Like, once I actually put pen to paper, it's the quickest. Um, it's more about, like, getting geared up to do it and having enough of an idea of what it's gonna look like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, because even though I'm doing digital art and like I can literally just scrap whatever I'm doing and try again, I still have that same fear of permanence that I think a lot of artists do, where it's like once I put this mark down, it's there forever and like I'm committed to whatever I did. And that's not true at all, but I still kind of feel that way. So like I have to think about it for a little bit and mentally go through and see how many panels I'm going to have and then sketch it out. And like my storyboards sometimes are I have to explain them to you verbally because
Yeah.
there's no clear indication of what's happening except in my own head. Um,
Yeah, it's rough images. It's
yeah,
that is that guy's head, not a ball. Like
right.
that type of thing.
Or this is an explosion. It looks like a black mass, but like
Yeah,
just
exactly.
just picture it with me. So I think that's the shortest part, and then I think inking inking is probably the longest because there's a couple of steps in there. Like um I have to actually like re-render from my terrible storyboard into something comprehensible
Mm,
that I can actually then ink. So that's kind of two steps combined. So that takes the most time. And then
mhm.
coloring is after that. And then shading, it depends on what kind of things are going on. Space has added a new element because there's a lot of dynamic light in space that I had
Yeah,
never considered. So sometimes that can be tricky, but for the most part, it's pretty smooth. So to sum it all up, I have no idea how long a page takes, but
perfect
uh,
answer.
yes, you're welcome.
So I'm along the same lines, but it's definitely a different process. So a page can take a while, but it's kind of dependent. So for instance, I can write a full page of something in 10 minutes, and I guarantee you it's awful and it's going to need re-edited several times and dialogue taken out and put in, and it might not even flow the correct way to where when Carissa goes to draw it, there's not a bunch of issues of, hey, why did this move? Where did this person go? That all of those things have to take some type of precedent in what I'm drawing or writing, because it has to be drawn and it has to be understood. And so I have to think about, okay, what's in the background? Where are these people facing? Why do they have this look on their face? What emotions are driving them? This character, what makes them tick? Why would they make that choice to say that thing? All of those things come through every single page. And so as I'm writing, and even right now, I'm writing a side story that will eventually come out, kind of like the Bandit King, and I can tell you I've rewritten the first page about 12 times because the intro is so important. And yeah, I moved on from that, but I come back to it and rewrite it again and tweak it because writing, much like drawing, is a big process. And when you first write, it's that storyboard, it's that basic idea, fundamentals of what you're planning to do, and then you go back and you fix it and you fix it until it looks right. And that's how the process works. Just like you'd have an editor come on, Carissa has me look at it, she has her dad look at it, she has Matt look at it, several people look at her art, and then she takes those criticisms and figures out how best to fix all those ideas, because you won't see everything by yourself.
Mhm.
So how long does a page to write? Anywhere from 10 minutes to 8 hours.
Well, how long did it take you? Because originally, when you wrote Burdens of Draco, it was like a novel. So,
Hmm.
how long did it take you to transform that
Yeah,
into like the page by page
yeah.
scripts that we work on?
A lot longer than it took me to write the novel. So I wrote I think it was like 250 something page novel, um, in three months, writing 5 hours a day. And over the course of the next couple years, I wrote it into a script, and that took a lot of research to figure out how to write a script. It took conversations with artists that had been interested in what I was doing at the time, because he was more aware of that. He was going to school for comics, and so all of those things came into play. And then I also had to go back and think about, okay, I was trying to use eloquent language to describe the scene or have this dialogue, but now it needs to be short and punchy because this is way too much to have in one panel, or this is
Right.
just too much exposition. I don't need them talking this much. How can
Mm-hmm.
I show this through a picture? And so that was a whole different thought process that I would say took me 4 or 5 years to really feel like I had a grasp on writing pictures instead of writing
Mm-hmm.
novels. And now going back to writing this side story, oh man, it's a breath of fresh air because it's a huge challenge to think that way again. Oh,
Right.
well, I'm writing this side story and I have to describe the scene a lot more detailed. I can't just say a space cabin looks kind of like this and send Chris a picture. I can't do that.
Man,
So,
that must have felt good for you.
oh yeah, it was awesome. Like I love to write. So I think I'm like about 20 pages in so far, and I'm just really enjoying it. It's been a lot of fun, and that's a cool thing to be able to attach in there. But yeah, that whole process, changing a novel into a comic script, yeah, that took way longer than what it takes me to write a page now. I'd say over time you get faster, just like with drawing. The more
Yeah.
repetition, the more practice, the faster you get. Doesn't mean it's perfect the first time, but
Right.
you get faster at it.
Yeah, and I like, to be honest, we're still cutting it down, like, as
Mhm.
far as the script goes, because there's just so much that, like, even I like, because I never there's stuff that I don't even take out, like, the first time that I'm just reading it, where I'm thinking of what I'm gonna draw, and, like, yeah, there are a few suggestions here and there, but, like, I mean, even yesterday, we had a
Mhm.
conversation where it was like, I actually got to the point of drawing it, and I was like, "No, this doesn't there's just too much."
Yeah, it doesn't
Like, and it
flow.
and it right, and it doesn't look like too much, but then when you actually start to draw it, it's just there's so much
Mhm.
balance that has to be made between pictures and words that
Right, yeah.
you can't foresee.
And as soon as you mentioned it, I thought back to that scene. I was like, "Yeah, that is too much." Like, until I had thought through that process and you mentioned why you wanted to get rid of it, I didn't think about, "Oh, yeah." But that's all part of the process, and when you
Mhm.
the only thing we really have to be careful of is that we don't get rid of anything that is important, and that's
Right.
not
Critical.
too hard to do if you know the story well, which
Mhm.
we both read through the whole thing. We both know where it goes.
And one of us wrote the whole thing, so
Yeah, a
got that going
few
for
times.
us.
As you look at the big picture, I wrote here, "It seems like it's a long haul."
It
So,
is a long haul.
as you look at the big picture, it's a long haul. What keeps you motivated, I guess, so far? Because we're on chapter 3 of 15, so
Right. Well, now that you mention it, gee.
far.
Um, yeah, I did read your question and I thought, well, what does keep me motivated? What there was an oncoming existential crisis happening. So, um, yeah, we're gonna get into a lot of like self-exploration here because I was thinking about it and like there really isn't anything I think inside of me most days that is motivating. I have my own like I have my own personal reasons for that, like just the place of life that I'm in
Mhm,
is very it's difficult to be motivated in general, but I think most of my motivation is external, like from you. Like not necessarily directly. It definitely does help, like
mhm,
when tell me good job. That's great. um, but I think it's mostly like your expectations, like wanting to help you and to meet your expectations and to help you realize your dream. It's mostly like your motivation is my motivation.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a
um,
shared dream.
right. And I think that's what, like, even when I can't find it in myself to, want to do something, um, there's always that thing that's like, well, this is for Micah. Like this isn't for me. This is for Micah. So let's do it. And not that I don't enjoy doing it, because I do. It's just, sometimes, as we all know,
Mhm.
it's a little hard to feel like you want to get things done. So I think there's that. And then there's also that point, like, in between releasing comics, which this is our, I guess, technically our third time in between,
Mhm.
if you count the time before we even started.
Yeah.
um, it's really easy to forget that we're, like, even though, yes, I'm doing this, like, for you, ultimately we're doing this for other people, because this
Mhm.
is something that we're sharing. So remembering that we're releasing this story to share with other people is very motivating. To remember that, like, there are, despite what I may think, there actually are people who are looking forward to the next chapter, and, like, I don't want to disappoint them. I want them to have the story, as soon as I can make it happen. So,
Mhm.
um, that is motivating when I remember to think about it. Just because, in this long stretch, sometimes it's difficult to remember that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I identify with that quite a bit. Not that it is my dream, so I can't identify with that specific part, but the whole aspect of not feeling, um, like you can really do it right now. Like, it's just
Hmm.
sometimes I hit that wall, and I mean, my job at work, 8 hours a day, is being creative, and then I'm supposed to come home and be creative,
Yeah.
and that's difficult, and then, like, anytime you push creativity, it's difficult, and
Hmm.
I feel that quite a bit, and I think my 2 biggest motivations, one you mentioned, it's definitely the people who are reading this and the people who will read it in the future,
Right.
that haven't heard of it yet or haven't seen it yet. That's just, uh, it's pretty humbling that I created something that people are enjoying. I never had an expectation that really would like it but me. Like, I of course, I love it. I think it's the best thing out there because it's my story. I forget where I heard this, but your biggest fan is you. Like, there
Hmm.
is no one that's a bigger fan of Burdens of Draco and probably never will be than me. That's just the way it works because you know your characters as if they are part of you.
Hmm.
And so that motivation for other people to get to know them like I know them and have those feelings of excitement like I've had with stories that I love is a very cool thing to be able to share. And I would say the second thing that motivates me, especially right now, late here in a little bit, I'll talk about what's been going on in my life, but it's been extra hard to be motivated, is thinking of the project in the moment where it's finished and printed and everything about it is done and I'm sitting at a table at Indiana Comic Con or some other Comic Con because I'll probably do several, and I'm just sitting at my table talking to somebody about my book, which is sitting right there, and just talking to him about, hey, this took this many years. I've been working on it since I was whatever. And it's a story I put a lot of love and effort into it. The whole team has. And here it is. I'd love if you'd purchase it. And I hope you enjoy it too, as much as we've enjoyed making it. And that's going
Yeah.
to be really cool. So, as far as what's going on with me, I'm sure most people that will listen or are listening to this podcast will know my daughter Malin, back in August of 2018, had uh, now I'm not gonna be able to think. Meningitis, and that is an infection on your brain, like the film of your brain, the meninge, I guess it's called. I learned so much through all this about
I
medical terms.
yeah.
I feel like I'm a nurse now, but
Don't let them hear you say that.
yeah. But so she got that infection, and so we were in the hospital, my wife and I, for 35 days in Cincinnati. And we, from the time that happened, which this is a whole long story. I'll try and keep it concise. But since the time that happened, which was back in August, a few months before that, I think, I don't even know what month it was. It's all kind of a blur, but she was diagnosed with infantile spasms, which is like a baby seizure disorder. And so we had to give her medication for that, called Acthar, which was, we called it the nightmare drug because it only let her sleep about 2 to 3 hours a night, and we would have to be in shifts, and she'd cry and move around constantly because it was doing some crazy side effect stuff to her. But that's like the first line of defense against that, infantile spasms. So she had that done, and we were already exhausted. And then one of the side effects of Acthar medicine is a lowered defense immune system. So then she got meningitis just probably from the air. We didn't even leave home or go anywhere, and didn't allow people to come over for a good month, and she still got that. So we were rushed by helicopter to the hospital. We were at the hospital for 35 days, and then here I'll rush forward quite a bit. So we made it through that. She almost died. The doctors actually told us she might die, and we made it through that, and that was super difficult. We're still dealing with everything that went on with that, and she was diagnosed recently, like within the past month and a half, with a disease called CACNA1E. That's a bunch of capital letters because it's really long, so they just call it CACNA1E. And that thing that you've never heard of, I guarantee it, has affected 35 people ever in the world. So her disease, what she has with the chromosome mutation, has affected 35 people, some of which have already died. But she could live anywhere from tomorrow to 30 years old. We have no idea. And there's a lot of things that go along with that. I mean, she was also diagnosed with cerebral palsy. She has other things that are issues for her. And so, with all that going on, I decided I'm going to keep working on the comic. I'm going to push through this, but I'm definitely not going to put the effort required to really publicize and make known that chapter 2 is coming out. People will have to come back and read it at some point. I felt, and I still feel, that is a absolutely right decision because my family needs me, and that is where I'm going with everything that I care about. the
Mhm.
the comic is really important to me. I mean, very, very important. I feel like I'd lose a part of myself if I didn't continue on it, and it's actually part of what keeps me going through everything that's so hard for us right now. It's another motivation, the comic itself, to keep me going because my daughter just last week turned 1, and it
Mhm.
was she smiled for the first time in months. She doesn't interact with us. She doesn't walk or run or play or eat even. She doesn't even eat on her own. She lays in bed, and she either cries or looks somewhat happy, and, if she is crying and you pick her up, she might stop crying. That's about the most interaction I get with my daughter, and dealing with all that and trying to figure that out, along with trying to travel to schools and travel to youth groups and do that type of thing. It's not the right time. So with chapter 3, I'm planning to once again do a little bit more publicizing and everything. Hopefully we'll have respite nursing by then. We'll have somebody here that's dedicated hours to caring for Malin because there's a lot for both of us to do. And I can start living a little bit more normally again. But I am so happy to have been wise enough to sacrifice that time spent publicizing and really sharing something I love with people. Um, and that was so hard because chapter 2
Yeah.
came out and we both saw how many people have bought it or read it, and it's way less than chapter 1. And I think a big part of that is because people don't know it's out.
Yeah.
It's not on their radar. But the good
Yeah.
thing about that is this is a 15-issue series, and I have multiple times not heard about a book until it was finished, let
Oh,
alone
right.
chapter 3, and I blew through it, and I loved it, and I didn't think, "Oh, I really wish I would have been there when this was released in chapter 3." Chapter 2, you don't think that when you read a graphic novel, you just read it, you consume it because it's media. It's not necessarily about the moment itself unless you have the opportunity to meet the person that's doing it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what was going on there. And if you're listening to this, you probably had an idea of that already. But if not, hopefully that speaks to you and you realize, hey, this comic is something really cool for them, and they're encouraging me to chase my dreams, but my dreams should never outweigh my family or any responsibilities I may have. I have this huge dream, I have this thing. Is it going to interfere with me doing what I need to do to take care of my family? Because very early
Mhm.
on, I had prayed and talked to God and said, if you ever want to take this away from me, go ahead. It's not more important than what you have for me.
Right.
And he's never done that, and I've never felt that way. But this was one of those challenges of, hey, I'm not going to take it away, but could you just put it a little bit to the side for a little bit and take care of your family and make sure that as much as they need you, especially my wife, Maggie, that she
Yeah.
has your support. Um, and I think that was huge. And moving forward, I think she she understands more than ever how much this means to me because it helped me get through a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I think that you're really good at that balance and like keeping this project has, in some ways helped keep you sane. I feel like, I mean, I don't know how you would like cope without something else to do and something else to think about. Like,
Right.
and
Yeah,
especially something like I imagine this is really comforting for you, like this story that is so familiar.
very much. Yeah. There are several times that, like, right now, my amount of free time and Maggie's amount of free time is so little that we actually schedule per week that we each watch the kids for 2 hours while the other person goes and does something for themselves. Two
Mm,
hours. So I get 2 hours a week to write, where I
yeah.
used to write 2 hours a day. Um, and so that for me, when I could choose anything. I could play video games, I could go out to eat, I could hang out with somebody, I could go exercise. I write. Every week for 2 hours, I write. And it's because I love it, and you're right, there's some form of comfort in this thing that has been with me for a while, and I can kinda get lost in that world
Mm-hmm.
and forget about what's going on right now. I mean, for me, one big dedication when this book's all done will be to my kids. I mean, when I first wrote this, I didn't even have kids yet, and the whole thought was I want to read this to my kids. And someday I will. And maybe Malin won't be around, or maybe she won't be able to understand, but it's for her and it's for Grayson, and that's super cool to think about Grayson someday growing up. And I mean, he already points at the characters on my shirt and he knows, like, he'll say their names. I mean, he's talking enough that he'll point at it and I'll say, "That's Finn." I'll say, "Finn." And he
That's
usually
so precious
it
and
is.
dorky.
Usually he calls the Bandit King Batman because he thinks any person on a shirt that's not like really brightly lit is Batman.
I mean, that's a logical conclusion.
Yeah. Well, Dad has a lot of Batman shirts, so I
It's
can see why.
well, should we discuss chapter 3 at all
Sure.
in some capacity? Like, I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know what we would say.
Well, we left off at the end of chapter 2. Spoilers coming up if you haven't read chapter 2, not for chapter
Do
3.
we have a warning signal that plays like the national alert system?
Yeah, I'll put that in there.
Okay.
But at the end of chapter 2, Zayden's like, "I'm going back. What?" And that's where we left off. And so with the surface of Tronin being destroyed, you're probably wondering, like, how are they going back? What are they going back for? All those questions. And we answer those in chapter 3. Is that a good way to do chapter 3?
Probably. Do we have anything? Sure, we have a teaser now.
Yeah, there's the teaser. And there's several new characters that
Oh,
show up.
right. Yeah, and we've shown the 3D sculpts of
Some of
all the
them.
new characters. All of them? Some of them?
All of them? I'm trying to think through the sculpts.
All of them except for one who appears in like a single panel.
Right. Yes. Yeah. A surprise character.
So surprising. So yeah, we had a lot of fun with those because they're, I mean, especially one of them is a particular favorite, which
Yep.
I'm sure you can guess from the bus just exactly which one is the zany one.
Yeah.
So that, like, I think that's something that we're both excited about because, you know, he'll bring a little bit of a different element to the story. And
Yeah.
I'm, even in the storyboards, I'm already having fun, like, just making him crazy. And
Yeah.
and his
Yeah.
expressions and just like general lack of awareness. It's great.
If there's one thing the story that's dark and just has had some very sad points needs, it's an imbecile, and we have one coming up.
A really smart imbecile too.
Yes, yes.
That's the worst part.
Yeah, but I'm excited for this chapter 2. This is really like the kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. So we've been in this setting up the universe, setting up the plot, setting up the main characters. Now we're getting into okay, here's some things that are happening. Here's this funny guy, here's this funny thing, and the it still has its dark undertones of different things because there's some pretty heavy stuff going on. But we lighten it up in chapter 3, and I'm excited to see how people react to that because I've gotten really good reaction to chapter 1 and chapter 2, the people that have read chapter 2, and um I can sense there's this feeling of, is it gonna like lighten up? Yes, it is.
Are you guys okay?
Yeah, this is not an emo comic. This is not it's
Well,
not
and
super dark.
I think now too, like in chapter 3 especially, like we saw in chapter 2, but now in chapter 3, like, this is finally Zayden's story. Like,
Mhm.
he finally gets to kind of take control of the narrative, and like, I mean, we're kind of finishing up shaping him like as a youth,
Yeah.
and I think that's part of what you mean, like when the setup is over, like we've kind of finished forming him,
Right.
and now like it's his time, and we get to follow him through like his journey, which is a little bit less tragic maybe than
Mhm.
than his background.
Well, my favorite stories, um, the main character is usually inspired by something awful. So, I mean, Batman's a great example.
Right.
Full Metal Alchemist, great examples.
Mhm.
It's how do we get this character to a point where they want to see change because of what has happened to them, and it's going to directly influence their decisions and how they operate for the rest of the book.
Right.
And in order to do that, it has to be dark. I
Mhm.
mean, uh, if you have something awful to you happen to you and it's in a light setting, it doesn't quite pull the punch it would have.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to
Mhm.
see that develop. And then for one last thing, for our next podcast, we are planning, and sometimes plans fall through, so hopefully they don't. But we are planning to have our comrade Matt back, which I missed you, Matt. You,
If you're
you are
out there.
a good friend, and we miss you. And hopefully, we're gonna have at least one, possibly two comic creators of another comic on to talk about their process and creation and how that connects back to their faith and what they feel God is calling them to do and how to use their creativity. And I think it'll be a really cool conversation. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to that too.
And by the way, Matt's fine. It's just that his kids dumped his headset in the toilet. So that's why we haven't had a podcast in a little while.
He can't. On that note, thank you for joining me, Carissa, and
Thank you for joining me.
I think we both want to say thank you to everyone who is following the comic, who's listening to this podcast. Um, we appreciate you so much, and we thank you for sticking with us and supporting us. And please, if you haven't read Chapter 2, go get it right now on matchstickcomics.com for 99 cents.
What? 99 cents?
Yep, and that's not all. Chapter 1 is free. So if you
But
haven't
wait,
read it
there's
at
more.
all, go get both and tell a friend while you're at it.
You have a future in infomercials.